We support Ukraine's sovereignty, absolutely, Mr Speaker.
We need to stand with Ukraine.
We must do what we can to help Ukraine stand up to these bullies.
We must show that we stand with Ukraine through our deeds.
We've become accustomed to the Australian government's declarations that as a country we stand with Ukraine.
Our government, and I know the whole of the Australian people, stand with Ukraine.
Australia stands with Ukraine.
Let us commit anew to stand with the people of Ukraine.
But in the past year, as Russia's invasion has intensified, with nightly missile and drone attacks, rolling blackouts and water cuts across Ukrainian cities, there's been no new material support from Australia. We now rank as one of the least generous donors to the country. At the same time, Australia has become one of the biggest buyers of fuel made from Russian oil. Ukrainian groups call it blood oil, purchased through a loophole that lines the pockets of the Kremlin to the tune of billions. I'm Ruby Jones, and you're listening to 7am. Today, Chair of the Australian Federation of Ukrainian Organisations, Kateryna Argyrou, on how Australia has paid more to Russia than it has to Ukraine, and how we're actually profiting off the war. It's Thursday, December 4. So, Kateryna, I thought we could begin by talking about the current situation in Ukraine, almost 4 years on from when Russia launched this phase of its invasion. So when you speak to people, to friends or to family back home, what do they say about what life is like right now?
Well, my entire family is currently in Ukraine, so I speak to my mom on a daily basis. I speak to my aunties, my cousins, and the feedback from all of them is that every single night is a new night of terror. So just last night, my mom had to spend the whole night sleeping in a underground parking lot in her car because Kyiv was under attack. Speaking to my cousin, who's based in Lviv on the other side of the country, there were also air raid sirens on, and there's missiles and drones flying overhead, and you don't know what is going to hit next.
Ilya was asleep in his apartment when the explosion shattered his window.
I saw flames right in front of me, flying fragments. Blood immediately ran down my face.
Everywhere you look, there's death and destruction. The energy grid in Ukraine has been significantly impacted, so there are blackouts every single day. There's no electricity, no heating, no running water. So the situation's very bleak, and while we see headlines of peace talks and peace plans being potentially brokered, when we look at Russia's actions, they have just escalated their attacks and are absolutely conducting a genocidal war against Ukraine right now.
And I think a lot of what you're describing perhaps isn't as known about as, it was, I suppose, 4 years ago when this began. If we go back to that time, to 2022, and the Australian response, tell me what you made of what the Australian government said at the time, and I suppose what your hopes were when they did voice their support for Ukraine?
Well, at the onset of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Australia stood out as a beacon of hope.
President Zelensky said, "Don't give me a ride, give me ammunition." And that's exactly what the Australian government has agreed to do.
I don't know if you remember, but it was a very memorable moment for our community here in Australia when President Zelensky addressed the Australian Parliament.
President Zelensky, Your Excellency, I now invite you to address members of the House of Representatives and Senators. You have our attention. You now have the floor.
The people of Australia, thank you for this honour.
He received a standing ovation. He received a huge amount of support.
Thank you, Australia. Slava Ukraini.
And that's when the announcement of the first Bushmasters of Australian military aid being sent to Ukraine was made.
It is an unwavering support that has so far included the provision of Bushmaster protected mobility vehicles, heavy artillery, critical ammunition, and contributions to the Ukraine Humanitarian Fund.
We saw a large bureaucratic system work overnight to provide support and to provide that sort of aid to a nation that was fighting for its survival, that was fighting for democracy and freedom. Since then, Ukraine has received several packages of aid, which are very much appreciated. And the only way that Ukraine can get out of this, and we can all get out of this, is if Ukraine has the tools to get the job done.
And at the same time, we know the Russian invasion of Ukraine has had a dramatic impact on global commodity prices. So can you lay out what that has meant for Australia?
Yes, so with any conflict, with any war, that obviously has an impact on global financial markets. It has an impact on global commodity markets. Ukraine being the breadbasket of Europe and being an agricultural powerhouse has obviously impacted global markets for wheat. It has impacted other commodity markets, and we have seen prices shoot up. At the same time, while Australia has been supporting Ukraine in the form of military and humanitarian aid, from this ongoing conflict and the spike in commodity prices, Australia has actually benefited from it because Australia itself is an agricultural powerhouse that produces a lot of wheat and other commodities that have seen escalation in prices, and the Australian government has benefited from that.
There's also been sanctions on Russia as well, though. What does that look like in practice?
So sanctions on Russia started with sanctioning Russian companies, Russian individuals that had a direct tie to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and stopped the direct import of Russian crude oil.
Our intention today, and the decisions taken by the National Security Committee, are to ensure that we are in lockstep with the United States and the United Kingdom in the sanctions that they are imposing upon Russia and these.
But unfortunately, there is a glaring loophole in these sanctions, which currently makes Australia the single largest importer of refined Russian crude from third countries. And so that's what we're trying to get the Australian government to close that sanctions loophole and for Australia to stop financing the Kremlin.
Okay, tell me more about that. So we've got sanctions. The import of Russian crude oil is officially banned. So what is this loophole? How is it getting here?
So this has been confirmed by research by an independent think tank in Europe called KRIA, where they have tracked and traced every single tanker of oil that leaves Russia and goes to third countries, gets refined into fuel products, and then gets exported to other consumers. And so while we stopped importing Russian crude from Russia directly, Australia imports refined Russian crude from countries like India, China. So they've identified one particular refinery, just to give you an example, in Jamnagar, India, where that refinery has increased its stock intake of Russian crude and refines it, mixes it with other oils, and then exports it to other markets like Australia. So when we go and fill up our tanks here in Australia, most Australians unknowingly are paying the Kremlin tax dollars for the refined Russian crude that has come in via third countries like India. If we look at the import of refined Russian crude from third countries that Australia has sent money to the Kremlin, that number is over $2 billion. So on the one hand, Australia is supporting Ukraine with $1.5 billion in aid that's being sent to Kyiv. On the other hand, Australia is sending more than $2 billion in tax dollars for refined Russian crude to the Kremlin. So essentially, Australia is sending more money to the Kremlin than it is to Kyiv.
Coming up, why does the government claim it can't track this oil when others can? And you've been speaking directly with the Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, about this. So tell me about the case that you've made and how you think it's been received.
Yes, so Minister Penny Wong and her entire office has been very receptive to us, to our concerns, and has heard us out. There was a Senate inquiry last year into aid for Ukraine where this issue was publicly flagged.
A tanker from Jamnagar is actually docked in Melbourne while this hearing is in session. This tanker carries 62,000 tonnes of 91-octane petrol, including 16,000 tonnes derived from Russian crude, to be sold to Victorian motorists who are totally unaware of the shady provenance.
Since the beginning of the year, we've had a number of meetings with Minister Wong and also her office saying that this is the number one concern for our community right now. The feedback that we've heard from DFAT is that there aren't mechanisms in place to track and trace this refined Russian crude that comes from Russia via third countries.
So the Tom Emily is a Danish flag vessel. It's midway through the Indian Ocean at the minute, carrying 69,000 tonnes of diesel from Mangalore refinery to BP Kwinana again.
Now, we completely do not understand that argument, considering that we have a chemical engineer, Mark Corrigan, that's based in Tasmania, and he himself, with publicly available information, is able to track and trace those tankers that are coming, for example, from Jamnagar into Australian ports. And our community has been able to greet those tankers and stage protests outside of those ports to highlight the issue. Surely the Australian government can also learn from partner countries, for example, those in the EU or the UK that have announced that it will ban imports of refined Russian crude from third countries. We certainly hope and believe that Australia can follow suit and do the same thing and close the sanctions loophole.
And I think a lot of what you're saying here would be pretty surprising to many Australians, a situation where our government is indirectly paying the Kremlin billions of dollars more than is being sent to Ukraine, despite their declarations that they have and do stand with Ukraine. So what is the effect of that?
Well, very simply, the effect of that, I can give you my own personal example. I had a cousin that was fighting on the front line defending Ukraine from the very first days of the full-scale invasion. He was killed on the front line. He was killed by a Russian drone. My mom, several months ago, sustained terrible injuries to her head because a missile hit the building right next to her, and all her windows in her apartment were blown out. Her bedroom door was blown out. She was thrown across the room and severely injured her head. So that's just my personal story. I've lost my cousin. I almost lost my mom. And there are millions of Ukrainians that are currently experiencing this terror. So every day that the Australian government, that the Albanese government delays the decision to close the sanctions loophole and to continue to import blood oil and to continue to send money directly to the Kremlin, it means that inadvertently and unknowingly, Australian motorists and Australian citizens are financing a war on the other side of Europe that is killing people every day and destroying lives every single day.
Russia and Ukraine, this has been going on for almost 4 years now. So as this war stretches on, and you mentioned the negotiations involving the US, they don't seem to be anywhere close to what Ukraine could accept. So what are your fears for the future of Ukraine?
My fears are that Russia will continue doing what Russia is good at, which is saying one thing but doing another, pretending to take part in so-called peace talks but putting forward demands that are completely untenable, putting forward demands that a sovereign nation must give up its land, its people, and have them subjected to torture, have them subjected to human rights violations. That is something that Ukraine will never agree to, because for Ukraine, it's not just a line in the sand. It's not just some piece of land. They're human lives. They are citizens. They are families that are being impacted. If we look at what has been happening since President Trump got elected and these peace talks started occurring, Russia has only escalated their attacks. Record number of drones, record number of missiles, and a record amount of destruction across all of Ukraine. So the sooner the world or the West, our allies, realize that, the better, because the only way that Russia can be defeated is through strength. So by having a united voice and a united approach to Russia of making sure that Russia gets out of Ukraine, leaves a sovereign nation and does not change borders by force, and if we equip Ukraine to defend its land and put it in a position of strength where Ukrainians can expel the occupying forces off their land, that is the only solution to this war and the possible end to this conflict.
Well, Kateryna, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Also in the news, former political staffer Bruce Lehrmann has lost his bid to overturn a court ruling that found on the balance of probabilities he raped his colleague Brittany Higgins in Parliament House. The federal court has dismissed the appeal filed by Lehrmann, who argued the decision by the judge in April of 2024 was unfair to him. The appeal loss means Lehrmann, who is nearly bankrupt, could be forced to pay $2 million in damages to Network 10 and journalist Lisa Wilkinson, as originally directed by Justice Michael Lee. And social media apps Lemon8 and Yope may be added to Australia's under-16 social media ban, which comes into effect next week. The two platforms have surged in the App Store charts as young people flock to alternatives to the apps so far named in the upcoming age restrictions, which include Instagram, TikTok and X. The eSafety Commission has written to Lemon8 and Yope, recommending they self-assess to determine if they fall under the new laws. I'm Ruby Jones. This is 7am. Thanks for listening.